Well, welcome and good morning to Elevenses. Sorry I'm a bit late this morning. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly webcast, which I hope is going out without too many glitches this morning. Everything appears to be moving fairly smoothly on screen. I can't see any stuttering. Had some technical hitches in the previous show due to problems with the streaming software. Hopefully you can actually hear me clearly. They're lopping a tree directly outside the window, which they started, of course, about 2 minutes ago this morning. So if you can hear some noise, I'm afraid that's the result, or that's the cause of it. Now, the other thing that I have a slight problem with at the moment is that I haven't managed to get my notes across to the laptop. I'm desperately trying to do that at the moment. I had a PC crash, of course, just before I came on air, just as I was moving my notes over. So hopefully I'll get those over in just a second. But to give you an idea of what we do have in today's show, I'll be looking at a rider who got slapped with an £800 fine and 6 points for trying to hide his registration plate. Not a smart move, really. We'll also have a quick look at motorcyclist who decided to ride on the pavement and without a helmet and without a number plate attracted the police attention, not too surprisingly, and was discovered to be selling drugs. The third story is actually quite an interesting one because it's about a training school that wants to use Oliver's Mount, the racetrack up in Scarborough, which is also a public road, for motorcycle training, and has actually been turned down by the local council. I'm not entirely sure why that might be. I've got some ideas on that, but anyway, we'll have a quick look at that story, and then we'll be looking at some of the bikes that have actually been unveiled at Intermot, which is the Cologne motorcycle show. It's one of the first big shows of the year, and we'll finally conclude with today's discussion point. I'm going back to the accident top 10. We're at number 6, and this one will be about crashes around stationary vehicles. So apologies for being slightly chaotic this morning, but hopefully I'm now up and running. Don't forget, October's live online talk series event has been rescheduled. It is tonight. It is the science of being seen. It is in depth. It's all about understanding visibility, conspicuity, and camouflage. So that's 8 p.m. tonight. Tickets are a £5. The link is in the preamble, but I will just put it up on the screen for you. And if you did try to book earlier, I had forgotten to put the purchase date for the tickets backwards to the 12th. I blame it on the COVID. I wasn't thinking at all clearly when I postponed it a week ago. Right, so anyway, on with today's news stories. Now, if you realize that you're about to run through a speed camera rather too quickly, and don't do what one Berkshire rider tried to do. 33-year-old Philip Kramer was caught on camera at 50 and a 30 across the border in Surrey, and he decided that the best thing to do was try to stop the speed camera seeing him. So this is what he actually tried to do. He tried to put his hand over his number plate. Well, it didn't do the job. He got his number plate, was still identified, and he was taken to court, and as a result he collected 6 points on his license and an £800 fine. And the police commented, from Surrey Police, that he was found guilty of not just speeding, but also obstructing police and failing to nominate a driver. In other words, failing to identify who was actually at the bars at the time of the incident. And the spokesperson said that had he just basically coughed to the crime, he would have got 3 points and £100 fine. So yes, a bad choice there. Another bad choice, if you want to attract attention, one way to do it is to ride a motorcycle with no number plate on a footpath minus a helmet. And that's exactly what Stephen Riley was doing when he attracted police attention in April this year. But rather than stopping him straight away, he was basically put under surveillance, and he was seen later with two men. They were then stopped themselves, and they admitted that they'd just bought some cannabis for him. So the police turned up, searched his home in Staffordshire. They found not just cannabis, with a street value of between £12,000 and £26,000. They also found cocaine worth between £250 and £700. They also found snap seal bags, a grinder and working scales, along with £745 in cash, mobile phone, and the motorcycle he'd been spotted riding earlier. Officers basically he was basically then arrested, charged, and pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply controlled Class A drug. That was the cocaine. And he got various motoring offences as well, including riding not in accordance with a licence, using a vehicle on the public road without insurance, and possessing criminal property. So he got 5 years and 3 months at Stafford Crown Court, and Staffordshire Police are happy to see a significant amount of drugs taken off the street. Now, don't forget, as I say, if you are have any questions, anything you want to ask, talk about, comment on, do drop me a line. I will try to get back to you during the show if I possibly can. The noise level has just dropped. They've just finished lopping our tree. They'll no doubt be moving on to the next one down the street. I will try to get back to you either during or after the show. Now, next story is quite an interesting one, because this involves a motorcycle training school which has been trying to get planning permission. Now, I recall from my own time when I was working with a buddy of mine at the time on setting up a basic training school, just how difficult it was to persuade the locals they're not about to host the local chapter of the Hells Angels, and that training motorcycles don't make lots of noise. They are all properly silenced, and they're not a noise nuisance even when standing in the middle of the training area. I mean, we had a noise complaint from someone who lived the far side of a playing field over a railway line from where we were based. We actually went across as far as we could get towards his back garden, and actually had a noise meter, and you couldn't even hear the motorcycles over there over the bird noise. But interestingly, you could hear lawnmower noise from those houses in our training ground. So lawnmowers being used in that street were actually louder than motorcycles. But anyway, this one is all about using Oliver's Mount up in Scarborough, and they've been turned down. So here's the track plan basically of Scarborough. Have a look at that. The application went in from Scarborough Rider Training on Tuesday, the 20th of September, and they were proposing to use an area known as Paddock C, which would have been, it's just off the Mere hairpin for those who know the track. So if I remember correctly, that's down in this part of the circuit down here. Now, Scarborough's planning officers said that they were not convinced that the level of activity associated with the proposed motorcycle training use would not result in harm to nearby residents. So let's try to have a quick look at where the nearby residents are. Well, there is a picture of the circuit. This is the Mere hairpin. The paddock area is down here that they would be using, and here are the nearest houses over the other side of a main road, and in fact over the other side of a large industrial development. So quite how they came to the conclusion that this would be harming the locals, I'm not entirely sure, because there's obviously that belt of woodland and almost a quarter of a mile from the nearest homes, as well as the paddock being in a bit of a dip, as I recall. So at that distance, against the traffic noise, the bikes manoeuvring would have been completely inaudible. Now, unless the plan that the training school was putting forward was to actually utilize the circuit's road for training, then I really can't see the problem. Now, they are a public road, incidentally. They are open to others, but I can see it's quite narrow, that there would have been some concern that motorcycles going round and round and round the training, the circuit, could pose a hazard to sort of walkers, pedestrians, cyclists, and so on. But otherwise, I really can't see how any harm could be used. Now, equally bizarrely, in my opinion, one of the objections was actually submitted by Oliver's Mount Racing Limited, which they said the motorcycle training would, quote, detract from the wider visual continuity of this natural escarpment, and that approval would be, quote, to the detriment of the public amenity. Now, they also claimed that the application did not take into account event days, and this would lead to, quote, two parties believing they have the right to use the same land at the same time. And they said this would impact the $3 million a year brought into the local economy by racing at Oliver's Mount. Now, more accurately, of course, it would have done had the organisation been running races. If they ever get around to it again, I would suggest is in doubt, because apart from the COVID cancellations, their events have been curtailed due to disintegrating infrastructure on the circuit itself. And that has been condemned by the council, and it caused races to be cancelled in 2021 and also this year. Now, in any case, the council actually reported that there was an agreement in place between Scarborough Rider Training, Oliver's Mount Racing, and Scarborough Council, who are the landowner, which would have ensured that any operational requirements of all parties involved would be met and no conflict would occur. So quite how Oliver's Mount Racing thought they'd be losing out, I really don't know. The only objection I can see is that the site does lie outside development limits for Scarborough, but frankly, since training schools rarely put up more than a porter cabin and a couple of storage containers, it's not exactly a major development, is it? And then I would suggest there's probably a good chance that they were hoping to use pre-existing buildings as well. But anyway, put it all together, and that's probably why the planners concluded that the training wasn't, quote, considered compatible with the setting and surrounding environments. The council report also suggested there were alternative sites the training school could use, and that's probably why the application was rejected. But a bit of a weird one, I have to say, and sometimes you do wonder what goes through councils' minds when they consider training school planning applications. Kevin's looked in. Good morning, Kevin. Nice to see you there. Hopefully all coming over nice and clear today. Now, don't forget, if you want to catch this show live, it goes out on Facebook. I'm now running it live on YouTube as well because it's easier to do than it used to be. If you want to catch up, you can catch up anytime, of course. Facebook is a little bit more tricky to find older shows on. On YouTube, they are easy to find because they're in their own channel. All right, so that's where you can find me anyway, 11 o'clock Sundays and Wednesdays. The mincing machine lopping the trees just started up again, unfortunately, a little bit further away, not quite outside the window, so hopefully it's not impacting too much on what I'm saying. Now, as we move towards late autumn, of course, it's motorcycle show season, when we get to see what models are going to be in dealers next year. Now, we've already seen Honda's big news. It's the new 750 Hornet Twin, and the Transalp photos of that have appeared online, and that is hotly tipped to appear at the Milan show very soon to come. So what else is news? Well, probably the biggest news of the lot, and literally, is that the wraps have been pulled off the electric bike from Kawasaki. And I did have a picture of this, but that's one of the victims of my PC crash just a moment ago. I haven't got that picture at the moment. Why is it big news? Well, simply because it's actually the first electric motorcycle from any of the mainstream manufacturers. Now, yes, BMW have a very expensive electric scooter. There are the Zeros that have been on sale for more than a decade. There are on-sale offerings from pricey European startups such as Energica. And most recently, we've got this one, which I have not seen before. This comes from a company with the name of Tinbot. I'm sure that has some meaning in German, which I am not aware of. And the bike is the catchily named TB RS1. Now, Tinbot were established in Germany a few years ago. I haven't heard of them, but they do have a range which apparently includes electric scooters, an enduro, and a motard variation based on that same platform. But this is their first sort of electric motorcycle with modern naked styling. And it's apparently a 125 equivalent. On top of that, of course, we have the range of bikes that are still in development after a number of years. There's Damon, who I talked about last week, having a big order book, but no bike having yet appeared. There's the Arc as well, which is now in testing as a prototype, but again, nothing's been delivered as far as I'm aware to end users who've bought these bikes. And then they're a bit further off. There are rolling test beds for the technology, like the Triumph prototype that I've been covering earlier this year. It's been seen, it's been running, but it's not going to turn into a street-ready machine overnight. So basically, if we want an economically priced, ready-to-roll e-bike, we've really had to look at the lower-powered bikes and scoots available from Chinese and Indian manufacturers. So I think it is a bit of a milestone that Kawasaki are the first to show off a prototype at a major show. Yes, they are saying it's a prototype, but it's been seen in action at the Suzuka 8 Hours, and judging by the photos of the bike on show, I think it's very, very unlikely that it's far off a production model. The company has promised to have 3 EVs on the road by the end of this year. So my bet is that this sort of 125 equivalent will be probably the first. Now, some people have expressed disappointment with the fact that it's only going to offer 125 equivalent performance. But frankly, look at global sales and see where they lie. They're mostly in the lower capacity end of the spectrum. My interest, I must admit, is in the hybrid that was also shown off at Suzuka. There's no word on whether that will actually appear as a production model, but if it does, the mix of what appears to be a 400 twin Ninja engine with a small electric motor is likely to give sort of 650, 700cc performance, but with the smaller machine's fuel economy, which should be good for fun. Now, I did suggest that the end of life of the petrol engine is probably not very far away. And the result of that is that we are likely to see a lot of tarted up bikes rather than the new models like the Hornet. And Triumph have pretty much confirmed that thinking with their Rocket 3R, which appeared at the first of the big motorcycle shows, the Cologne Intermot show in Germany. So what's so special about this bike? Well, you can't really see it very clearly in this particular photo, but never mind. It's actually blacked out bodywork with a chromed fuel tank, and apparently you can look forward to an entire range of Triumphs to arrive with chromed tanks. Triumph's general manager for Germany and Austria, and Natalie Cavafian. She said, "Today we present the Rocket 3R. You will also find the same colour scheme on other bikes we're going to announce. The bikes will be available from February in dealerships and as a collection of modern classics." And I frankly have to say, I can't wait. Meanwhile, BMW have shown off updates to some of their 2023 bikes, and one that caught my eye was the M1000RR. Now, for starters, there's no more power for 2023 over the, what I would say is a frankly ridiculous 212 horsepower for the 2022 model. But BMW are claiming, quote, massively increased top speed with significantly increased downforce thanks to new fairing, new winglets, new aero, front wheel cover with integrated M brake ducts and new M aero wheel covers. And they call that a colossal advancement in the aerodynamic area. Now, there's an interesting conflict in their claims here, of course, because any increase in downforce automatically means an increase in drag, which is why you get those cars with pop-up wings. So to offset the increased drag created by the increased downforce, the aerodynamics of the original bike really must have been pretty horrible. Mind you, I'm not sure I'd call increasing the top speed from 306 to 314 kilometers per hour, 195 miles per hour, a 5 mile per hour increase, a massive increase. You can work out the percentage for yourself. It's a couple of percent. But if the aerodynamics were that bad, I would guess that the rider has borne the brunt of that on the previous model, since the press release also says that the MRR rider benefits from noticeable physical relief, which presumably means your head is no longer being ripped from your shoulders when you try to do anything much over 60 miles per hour. Right, okay. The next bike, again, I've lost the photo for this, unfortunately, but Honda's CRF300 Rally is a bike that's gained a loyal following since it was launched a few years ago. My US-based brother has actually been thinking of buying one. But for a small capacity, single-cylinder bike with limited performance, they are pretty pricey. £6,449 is, I think, pretty steep for a bike with less than 30 horsepower, however competent it is. But back in the summer, the Chinese brand Voge aimed a bike aimed head-on at Honda. Again, I've lost the photo, but it looks visually very, very similar indeed. Now, it's called with the really unoriginal name of the Rally 300, and the machine really is very similar in outline to the Honda. And it's equipped with a very similar water-cooled 292 4-valve single, producing a claimed 28 horsepower, or 25 Newton meters if you prefer, at 9,000 RPM. Now, the motor itself is built by Sin, who are one of China's biggest motorcycle manufacturers, and the engine does appear to be the same as the one in the KLX300 from Kawasaki. Now, the Rally does get a fairly tall seat height, around 850 millimeters or 33.5 inches. Bike's a little bit on the heavy side at 159 kilos or 350 pounds, fully togged up. Now, up front, you get a 21-inch spoked wheel, non-adjustable forks. The 18-inch rear is on a straightforward preload only monoshock, but you do get 240 millimeters of travel at both ends and a fairly impressive 280 millimeters of ground clearance. So the bike is well clear of the ground there. You get twin discs, one up the front, one up the back, dual channel ABS. The rear ABS can be turned off. Fuel capacity is 11 litres, which is 2.4 UK gallons. And the bike has been tested on YouTube to return around 88 mpg UK. So you should get a range of nudging 200 miles from it, which is quite good. On the downside, the LCD display is a bit basic. It appears to miss twin trip meters, which is pretty much a standard feature on these bikes these days. There's no fuel gauge either, which is always a bit alarming. I don't like fuel warning lights because you really don't know when it's going to come on. I much prefer a fuel gauge. But you do get crash bars and a rack at the rear as standard. Now, the road test reports suggest the top speed is probably under 80 miles an hour, which is a bit down on what I would expect. The old 250 RS Honda, which I've got a 40-year-old version of, will manage about 85. Well, it would if I actually drove it that fast these days, but I don't. It would back in my dispatching days. And the Rally does give you 18.5 pound-feet of torque at 6,500. So it's not too revvy a motor. The bike's not yet appeared in the UK, apparently due to a lack of importer, but in Germany you can pick one up for €4,229, which is about £3,750 at current exchange rates. So that's an interesting alternative to the Honda, and several £1,000s cheaper too. Right, okay, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can always pop over to my coffee page and support me over there. A cuppa helps me keep these shows coming, but it also buys you access to probably the biggest internet resource of better biking articles around. There are over 800 of them up online at the moment. You can read some for free, so get a taste of what's available. £3 gives you a month's access to most of the rest of the content. Right, so last thing today, I'm going to come back to the series I've been running occasionally, the Accident Top 10. And today we get to number 6 in that list. And this one's all about collisions around stationary vehicles. Now, when we're in an urban area, we know that most collisions happen at junctions, usually with a car. But the kinds of crashes that happen and involve that are around vehicles that aren't moving are also surprisingly common. And one thing I would say is that whilst many do involve inexperienced riders who haven't thought of the possible hazards, even though on CBTs we do tend to teach a lot of this stuff, experienced riders get caught out too, probably because it doesn't happen very often, but it happens often enough, as I say, to be a significant risk in urban areas. And it's one of the reasons I run urban riding courses, even for experienced riders, is to try to apprise them of some of the hazards. Now, as a courier, obviously I did quite a lot of riding in congested traffic, and one of the things we all discover pretty early on is because motorcycles aren't particularly wide, we can get them through quite narrow gaps, but the dangers arise when we trade off the risks of getting too close to hazards, and we emphasize the benefits of keeping moving. Now, if I were to ask you what's the most obvious threat from a stationary vehicle, I'd be a little bit surprised if you didn't suggest an opening door. Now, guess who broke a finger whilst dispatch riding in London in precisely those circumstances? I was actually filtering to the right of a queue. It was a one-way street, so I was going between the stationary queue and parked cars, when a cabbie opened his door right in front of me to empty his ashtray. Now, fortunately for me, the crash bar on the bike actually took much of the impact, and the rest of it was taken by the clutch lever. Unfortunately, I just happened to have my fingers behind it, so the lever came back and actually broke my left ring finger. But I have to say, I virtually stopped on impact, so the damage wasn't too serious. But something I see riders doing far too often, sometimes when I'm in the car myself and about to try to get out of the door, is riding too close to parked vehicles, even down streets where there's absolutely no need to do so. So the first resort, really, the best place to be is where an opening door can't affect us. Now, most cyclists will always say the driver should have checked before getting out, but frankly, you try looking in a door mirror and spotting a bike that's actually hedge hopping down a row of cars. Delivery drivers are really bad for this. They'll sort of swing into gaps to try to read numbers and be looking at their phones and all sorts of things, and then they'll pop out. So you'll look, the road looks clear, you start to open the door and suddenly there's a scooter behind you. And however careful you are, trying to see out of the back door of a modern car is almost impossible. I know the highway code has been banging on about using the Dutch reach, but frankly, I've tried it and it makes absolutely no bloody difference to what I can see out of that door until it's actually wide enough for me to stick my head out. And of course, rear doors are often opened by children as well, who, however carefully parents try to control them, will tend to fling a door like that open. So my tip here is to look to see if a vehicle has just pulled up. If it's just stopped, expect the vehicle to open doors. If lights have just gone out, that's another good clue. You might not have seen the vehicle stop, but if the brake light's just gone off, or the side lights have just gone out, expect a door to open. It may be pulling away, of course, as well, but expect the door to open if it isn't moving. So basically, whenever we have the option, we should position where we have a good clearance to the hazard. Now, I would normally say 2 meters if you can possibly achieve that, but absolutely no closer than an arm's reach and a bit. The big problem, the doors that swing widest are those on cars with no rear doors, so 2-seaters. Those front doors have to be very long to allow people to get out the back. So if there are cars parked on both sides of a residential street, as I live in here, just split the difference. One thing I see riders doing all the time is trying to stay left of the centre line when there's nothing coming the other way. Don't worry about it. Just drive absolutely down the middle of the road. If there's nothing coming, what does it matter? But what it does is it gives you the best possible clearance and the best possible view to both sides of the road. Even if there is a solid line on our side of the road, don't forget that the highway code allows you to cross that solid line to pass an obstruction. So if you have to pass a parked vehicle with a solid line, don't try to squeeze past the door. Move across the solid line as long as there's nothing coming the other way. But what if there are oncoming vehicles? Well, the answer is firstly to think, how wide is the road? If we can still pass a couple of meters from the parked vehicle and still keep well clear of the oncoming vehicle, then there's no problem. We can carry on through, although with hazards on both sides of the road, I probably would drop on my speed a little. But if we don't have sufficient space, we have two choices. And the first one is easy enough, isn't it? We can stop and wait. If it's just one vehicle, how long are we going to be delayed if we slow down, pull into a bit of a gap, wait for the car to come past us, and then carry on? If we have a queue of vehicles, a stream of vehicles coming the other way, then we have to make a decision. Are we going to stop and wait, or are we going to carry on? We can go through quite narrow gaps on a motorcycle. And I used to, again, coach riders to do this on the bike test. And what I would say is, as the gap gets narrower, the slower we go, so that if a door does open, we can stop on a sixpence. Car doors, of course, whilst a big hazard, aren't the only hazard. I recently showed a video nasty on Facebook of a rider forgetting that pedestrians can and do cross the road just about anywhere. In this case, it was a couple of vehicles short of a red traffic light. She sort of came out from behind a taxi, and the rider wasn't expecting that and basically didn't brake in time and knocked her down and fell off himself. Now, unfortunately, neither rider nor the woman had anything like serious injuries. They're both sort of I suspect a few bruises. That was about it. But it's worth remembering that unless we're on a road where pedestrians are specifically banned, like a motorway or some tunnels, for example, in law, pedestrians always have had the right of way over motor vehicles when crossing the road. Now, the new highway code, of course, changes the way we're supposed to apply that give way to pedestrians by requiring us to give way to pedestrians who are waiting to cross. And as I pointed out when I was talking about this back in the spring, I would say that that's particularly awkward if we're turning right. We have to be very careful about giving way when turning right to a pedestrian waiting on the pavement, because people just won't expect us to stop when the turn is clear. So we have to be very careful if we do give way that we don't get splatted by somebody else who didn't expect us to come to a halt. But people, of course, also walk out between cars on roads where they are parked. Now, the thing is we have to think about is, who might these people be? They might be getting into their own car, of course. They might not just be crossing the road. Can we see them? Well, it depends on the height of the car. A standard vehicle, you should be able to see an adult fairly easily over the roof of the car. But a 4x4, you're probably not going to see them. Advanced training often sort of says, look under cars and you'll be able to see feet under them. Yeah, okay. It's one of those sort of smarty, clever things. But the only time you're ever going to be able to do that is if you're coming up a hill and the car is parked on the brow of the hill and there's somebody walking behind it. So, you know, it is a tip, but it's one of those ones which doesn't actually give us many options to use it. So what I would say is, watch the pavement. Don't just drive down the road thinking about cars coming the other way or even doors opening, but keep an eye on the pavement for people. If you see somebody walking down the pavement and they suddenly disappear, there's a fair chance what they've just done is walked behind a vehicle. So they may be walking out to cross the road, they may be walking out to get into it. Look through car windows. If they're not too darkly tinted, we can often pick up movement, although I will say again that small children are particularly difficult to see, so be cautious. Even if it appears clear, you do need to be able to stop on a sixpence in case a small child steps out in front of you. Buses are another obvious hazard. The highway code says don't step out from behind a bus, but of course, guess what people do? They also step out from in front of it, of course, depending on which way it's going. And one other hazard is people suddenly running across the road from the opposite side to try to catch one on your side of the road. Delivery vans. By definition, they're not going to be stopped for very long, are they? So we need to watch for doors opening, but we also need to watch for the driver walking back to the vehicle and getting in. Just the other day, I watched a trucker nearly get flattened by a bike. What he'd done was walk around the front of his cab and stepped into the road just as a motorcycle swerved left to pass through the narrow gap between the truck and a car which had just slowed and stopped to turn right. And the another thing to watch out for with any delivery van is doors swinging open. That's particularly a problem, of course, if the van is parked facing the wrong way at the side of the road. The driver who's opening the door may not look up the outside of the vehicle before swinging the door open. Another problem of people looking the wrong way, pedestrians on one-way streets. I've done that myself, not realised the street is one way, looked the wrong way, stepped out and then nearly been hit by something coming up the what appeared to be the wrong direction. Excuse me. And tourists, of course, will look the wrong way on a two-way street too. Look for cameras around necks or people perusing maps. That's always a good clue. And one thing to bear in mind, if you have a loud pipe on your bike, don't assume anybody's going to hear it. There are more and more people walking around with headphones and earphones in, listening to music, talking on the phone, whatever. Not only can they not hear us, they're distracted too. I've also had the odd encounter with people who've had one or two bevies too many. So watch out for those. There are obvious times of the day when that's likely to be a problem. But the bottom line is, basically, when passing traffic, never assume somebody won't walk out in front of you, particularly if you're passing a place where you may not see them. And finally, don't forget the inhuman road users too. Foxes are increasingly an urban pest, and they have a habit of running from one driveway to another because they're getting from one back garden area to another back garden area. And they can be found, right in the middle of busy cities. Dogs can also be loose in residential areas. And don't forget cats as well, because they'll often shoot out from under a parked car. And finally, just because you're stopped, don't assume that you're safe either. A very good friend of mine who was filtering thought she'd done all the right things. She pulled up into a gap when traffic came the other way, and she was sat there, several seconds. And at that point, somebody literally ran into the side of her bike. Somebody had sprinted out between the two vehicles to cross the road and was clearly not looking in front of them, and absolutely sent her purling. She was very lucky that she fell over behind a traffic island and not in front of oncoming traffic. So that's it for today's show. Hopefully you've picked up some tips there about riding in London and other cities. Kevin says, good to focus on hazards such as these. Many are sloppy risk mitigation in urban and confined areas. Yeah, unfortunately, particularly the courier riders these days with their food deliveries on board. Swinging open rear doors on trucks are a significant hazard, he says. Yes, indeed. And e-scooters jumping off pavements. Yes, that's actually one I should probably have mentioned too. The fact there are bicycles and e-scooters weaving in and out of traffic as well. So good reminders there. Thanks, Kevin, for that. Right, that's it for today. Predictably, as I finish, the racket outside has also come to a halt. So I hope the noise from the tree lopping didn't affect things too much. I'll be back with another show on Sunday, all things being well. But if you do get the chance, don't forget that tonight I am delivering the Science of Being Seen presentation again. we'll be talking about the difference between visibility, conspicuity, and I'll also be discussing the effect of camouflage and how that works. So the idea is there to give you some insight into understanding the differences between those terms and why it is even that sometimes when we are allegedly conspicuous, we're either not seen or we in fact camouflage ourselves. So thank you very much indeed for looking in. Sorry about the slightly late start and the slight disruption to me pictures due to a PC crash. It's just one thing after another at the moment. Right, anyway, thank you very much indeed. This is Kevin Williams of Survival Skills signing off. And don't forget, if you are out there on the bike today, it's a bit miserable and grey here in London, but it's supposed to stay dry. Do stay shiny side up.